The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days on Riverside Colony. Water poured from the sky like someone had torn open the clouds themselves, turning the streets into rivers and the fields into lakes. The whole world had become nothing but gray water and darker gray sky. Rachel Bennett was only 10 years old, standing in mud that sucked at her boots with every step. Her father's rain jacket hung past her knees, the sleeves rolled up so many times they looked like blue donuts around her wrists. She should have been running toward the evacuation shuttles with everyone else. The sirens had been wailing for hours now, that awful up-and-down sound that made her chest feel tight. The Clearwater River had broken through its banks like an angry beast, swallowing up homes and farmland in murky brown water that moved faster than anything Rachel had ever seen. Rachel, come on. Her older brother Danny was already at the transport, waving his arms like a madman. His voice barely carried over the roar of wind and rain. Everyone was loading up, families cramming into the vehicles that would take them to higher ground. Her mom was probably frantic by now. But Rachel had heard something. A sound that didn't fit with the storm, didn't belong to the chaos of wind and thunder. It was high-pitched and desperate, like crying but not quite. Something was in pain. She found it near the old drainage tunnel, the one the colony had been meaning to repair for months. Concrete slabs had collapsed during the storm, creating a cage of broken stone and twisted metal. Wedged between the debris was a creature Rachel had never seen before, not in any book or video or teaching program. It was small, no bigger than a house cat, but that's where any similarity to normal animals ended. Its body was covered in scales that shimmered silver blue even in the gray light of the storm. When lightning flashed overhead, those scales lit up like they were made of mirrors and rainbows. The creature had wings, delicate and translucent like dragonfly wings but torn in several places. Blood, darker than human blood, dripped from the wounds. The wings lay crumpled against its shaking body. But it was the eyes that stopped Rachel's heart. They were bright gold, glowing faintly in the shadows. And they were intelligent. Not animal intelligent but people intelligent. The creature looked at her, really looked at her, and Rachel knew somehow that it understood exactly how much danger it was in. Rachel didn't think. Thinking would have meant remembering that the water was rising, that her family was leaving, that she could die out here. Instead, she waded into the water that came up to her chest. It was cold enough to steal her breath and fast enough to push against her legs. Danny was screaming her name now, his voice cracking with fear, but she couldn't stop. She grabbed a metal rod from the debris, probably part of the old tunnel structure, and used it as a lever. The concrete slab weighed more than she did, but fear and desperation gave her strength she didn't know she had. The debris shifted, groaned, then lifted just enough. The creature made a sound, something between a whimper and a chirp. Rachel dropped the rod and reached in with both hands, lifting the small body as gently as she could. It weighed almost nothing, like holding a bird made of glass. She wrapped it in her father's jacket, tucking it against her chest to keep it warm. "I've got you," Rachel whispered, her teeth chattering from cold and adrenaline. "You're safe now. I promise." Getting back to the transport was harder. The water tried to pull her down, and Danny had to jump in to help her climb aboard. Their mother cried and yelled at the same time, but Rachel barely heard. She was focused on the creature in her arms, watching its chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. The evacuation center was chaos when they arrived. People everywhere, crying children, adults arguing about supplies and space. Rachel dripped water all over the floor, still cradling the strange animal. People stared. Some pointed. A few backed away like she was carrying something dangerous. Dr. Patterson, the colony's only veterinarian, was an older woman with gray hair always pulled back in a tight bun. She took one look at the creature and her eyes went wide. She pulled out her diagnostic scanner, ran it over the small body, then checked the readout 3 times. "I don't know what this is," Dr. Patterson said slowly, like she couldn't quite believe her own words. "It's not in any database. Not Earth animals, not any of the registered alien species. This thing. Rachel, where did you find it?" "In the drainage tunnel. It was trapped." Rachel held the creature a little tighter. "Can you help it?" Dr. Patterson was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "We'll try." For 5 days, Rachel barely left the medical area. She slept on a cot next to the creature's bed, brought it water, talked to it constantly. And the creature responded. It learned fast, faster than seemed possible. By the 2nd day it was mimicking sounds Rachel made. By the 3rd it was touching her hand with what looked like gratitude. Its golden eyes followed her everywhere, and when she had to leave for meals or to check on her family, it made sad little chirping sounds until she came back. Rachel named it Flicker because of the way light danced across its scales, creating patterns that shifted and changed like living art. Then, on the sixth morning, everything changed. Rachel woke to a sound like reality tearing apart. She ran outside with everyone else and looked up. The sky had split open. Ships were appearing out of nothing, materializing from faster-than-light travel in bursts of light that made her eyes water. They were beautiful in a way that made Rachel's throat tight. The ships looked like they'd been carved from mother of pearl, all smooth curves and surfaces that caught the sunlight and threw it back in colors that shouldn't exist. 12 ships hung in the sky above Riverside Colony, and every alarm on the planet started screaming. The beings that came down in the shuttles were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. They stood 8 feet tall, their bodies covered in opalescent scales that made Flicker's coloring look dull by comparison. They had wings, huge wings that could have blocked out the sun, folded against their backs. They moved like dancers, like warriors, like kings. Every step was grace and power combined. They called themselves the Skyborn Dominion. The name alone made people nervous. This was a species humans had heard rumors about, whispers of an ancient civilization so powerful they didn't bother with alliances or trade. They'd been exploring the stars when humans still thought Earth was flat. Their leader was the largest, his scales shifting between gold and silver with each movement. He walked right past the colony administrator, right past the security forces pointing weapons with shaking hands. He walked straight to Rachel. His voice came through a translation device on his armor, but even translated it sounded like wind howling through canyons, like mountains singing. "You saved our prince." Rachel looked down at Flicker, except Flicker wasn't small anymore. In just 6 days the creature had doubled in size. It chirped excitedly and pressed its forehead against Rachel's palm, the way it had done 100 times before. The gesture looked different now, formal somehow. Important. The Elder Skyborn watched this with eyes that gave nothing away. Rachel couldn't tell if he was angry or grateful or something else entirely. "The debt is recorded," the leader said. Each word felt heavy, like he was making a promise the universe itself would have to keep. "The Dominion does not forget." They left as quickly as they'd come. The ships rose into the sky and Flicker went with them. The young prince kept looking back at Rachel until the shuttle doors closed. The last thing Rachel saw was those golden eyes, and somehow she knew this wasn't goodbye. It was a promise. A beginning. The ships vanished and life on Riverside Colony slowly returned to normal. But Rachel would spend the next 15 years wondering if it had all been a dream, and what those golden eyes had promised in that final look. Rachel tightened the bolt on the irrigation manifold and wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The sun beat down on Riverside Colony like it had a personal grudge, turning the metal she worked with almost too hot to touch. At 25 years old, she'd become exactly what she always wanted to be: an agricultural engineer. Someone who helped feed people, who made things grow in places they shouldn't, who solved problems with her hands and her brain. The Great Flood was ancient history now. Kids in school learned about it the way Rachel had learned about old Earth disasters, something that happened long ago to other people. The settlement had been rebuilt stronger than before, with better drainage systems that Rachel herself had helped design. The irony wasn't lost on her that the worst day of her childhood had shaped her entire career. She barely thought about Flicker anymore. Maybe once a month, if that. Sometimes late at night when she couldn't sleep, she'd lie in bed and remember those golden eyes. She'd wonder if it had all been real or if her 10-year-old brain had made up details, turned a regular animal rescue into something magical. Maybe it had just been some rare creature from a neighboring system, and the ships had been a coincidence. Maybe she dreamed the whole thing. But life didn't stop for maybes. There were crops to manage, irrigation systems to design and repair, and her little niece Lily to spoil every weekend. Danny's daughter was 6 now, all wild curls and endless questions. Rachel was the fun aunt who brought candy and told stories about fixing robots. It was a good life. A normal life. Humanity had spread across hundreds of worlds in the past few decades, like seeds scattered on the wind. Earth was crowded, so people left. They built colonies on planets that were close enough to Earth-like, terraformed the ones that weren't. Humans were everywhere now, but that didn't mean they mattered much. In the grand scheme of galactic politics, humanity was still the new kid. The annoying teenager nobody wanted to sit next to. Most of the elder races ignored humans completely. Too young, they said. Too aggressive. Too unpredictable. Too loud. Humans had a reputation for shooting first and asking questions later, for breaking things they didn't understand, for being reckless in ways that made ancient civilizations nervous. The Skyborn Dominion was barely even a rumor. Rachel had looked them up years ago, trying to confirm her memories. There wasn't much information. They were isolationists, so powerful they didn't need allies or trade agreements. So ancient they'd been traveling between stars when humans still thought Earth was the center of the universe. Nobody had heard from them in decades. Some people thought they'd died out or left this part of the galaxy entirely. Rachel had dated a few people over the years. Nothing serious. She'd worked hard, made her parents proud, helped her community. She was ordinary in the best possible way and she liked it that way. Then everything changed on a Thursday evening. Rachel was in her small office, reviewing crop yield data on her tablet and trying to figure out why the western fields were producing 20% less than projected. The numbers weren't making sense. She was thinking about soil composition and water pH levels when her comm device started buzzing. Danny's face appeared on the screen. Her brother looked pale, his eyes wide. His voice shook when he spoke. "Rachel, turn on the news right now. Don't ask questions, just do it." She switched her tablet to the news feed and felt the world tilt sideways. The sky above Riverside Colony was disappearing. Ships were emerging from nowhere, materializing out of faster-than-light travel in flashes of light that looked like stars being born. Hundreds of them. No, thousands. They kept coming, wave after wave, until the stars themselves were hidden behind hulls that shimmered with familiar opalescent colors. Skyborne vessels. She recognized them instantly, even though she'd only seen them once 15 years ago. Sleek and beautiful and absolutely terrifying. They moved in perfect formation, each ship precisely placed like pieces on a chessboard. The news commentator was trying to stay calm but failing. This was the largest fleet anyone had ever seen. Enough firepower to crack planets open like eggs. Every human military base in the sector went to red alert. News networks across hundreds of worlds exploded with speculation and fear. Was this an invasion? Had First Contact just turned into First War? Why now? Why here? Rachel stood in her yard, tablet forgotten in her hand, staring up at the armada. Something twisted in her chest, a feeling she couldn't name. It was part fear, part recognition, part something else entirely. A memory of golden eyes and a promise made without words. The Skyborne fleet started broadcasting on all channels, ignoring military frequencies completely. They weren't talking to governments or defense forces. The message was simple, translated into every human language simultaneously. "We seek Rachel Bennett of Riverside Colony. She will not be harmed. This is a matter of honor." Rachel's comm device exploded with incoming calls. Colonial security. Earth government. The military. Her parents. Friends she hadn't talked to in years. Everyone wanted answers she didn't have. Her hands shook as she tried to silence the device. Then, through all the chaos and noise and fear, a single shuttle broke formation. It descended slowly, deliberately, in a pillar of pure light that made Rachel squint. It landed in the town square, the exact spot where she'd brought a dying creature 15 years ago. The entire colony had gathered. Rachel walked toward the shuttle on legs that didn't feel like her own. Some people looked terrified. Others looked curious. Everyone was silent, watching her walk forward like she was going to her own execution. The shuttle's ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics that sounded too loud in the quiet. Rachel's heart hammered against her ribs. He emerged like something from mythology, from ancient human stories about gods and dragons. Nearly 9 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted between silver and gold with every movement. He wore armor etched with symbols Rachel couldn't read but somehow understood spoke of authority and power and age beyond measure. Wings folded against his back caught the setting sun and threw rainbows across the crowd. But his eyes hadn't changed at all. Bright gold. Kind. Full of intelligence that made Rachel's breath catch. Those same eyes that had looked at her 15 years ago, full of pain and trust and promise. "Rachel Bennett," he said, and his voice needed no translation. He'd learned English. Perfect English. "I told you the Dominion does not forget." Rachel couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could barely stand. Flicker? His expression was alien, impossible to read on that face covered in scales and angles that weren't human. But somehow, impossibly, she could see warmth there. Recognition. Something like joy. "I am called Prince Aurelian now," he said gently. "But yes, I am Flicker. And I have returned to honor my debt." The conference room in Riverside's administrative building had never held anyone more important than the regional agriculture minister. That had been 2 years ago, some boring meeting about crop subsidies that Rachel had fallen asleep in. Now the same room hosted a skyborn prince and 3 of his honor guard. The guards stood motionless along the walls, their armor gleaming, wings folded tight against their backs. They made the space feel impossibly small, like the walls were closing in. Rachel sat across from Aurelian, trying to process what he'd just explained. Her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She couldn't remember when someone had brought it. Time felt strange, like it was moving too fast and too slow at the same time. "Let me get this straight," Rachel said slowly, forcing her brain to work through the shock. "In your culture, saving a royal's life creates an eternal bond. Forever. Correct." Aurelian's wings shifted slightly, the feathers rustling like paper. She'd learned in the past hour that this movement meant emphasis, the way humans might lean forward or raise their voice. "You risked your life for mine when you had no concept of who or what I was. Such selflessness is rare in the galaxy. Vanishingly rare." Rachel almost laughed. It came out as a strange sound, not quite humor. "I was 10 years old. I saw something hurt and trapped. That's just basic decency. That's what you do." "Exactly." His golden eyes gleamed with something that looked like triumph. "You prove my point. What you call basic decency, most species call foolishness. The instinct to help the helpless, to risk yourself for a stranger, to act without calculating benefit. This is not common, Rachel Bennett. This is extraordinary." Through the window behind Aurelian, Rachel could see the massive fleet still holding position in orbit. They hung there like a second layer of stars, unmoving, patient. Every news channel in human space was covering this. Her comm device, now silenced and sitting on the table, showed 213 missed calls. 47 from Earth's government alone. 16 from the Colonial Alliance. The rest from news agencies, distant relatives she hadn't talked to in years, and people she'd gone to school with who suddenly wanted to reconnect. Aurelian leaned forward, his armored claws folding carefully on the conference table. The table was cheap plastic, meant for colony administrators and farmers discussing water rights. It looked ridiculous under those claws that could probably tear through steel. 5 years ago, I became Crown Prince of the Skyborn Dominion. It was not expected. I had 3 older siblings. But they died in an accident and the burden fell to me. Rachel hadn't known that. She felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry." He inclined his head, accepting the condolence. "My first act as Crown Prince was to search for you. It took time. Humans move often, and your colony kept poor records before the flood. My second act was to study humanity. Everything about your species. Your history, your cultures, your conflicts and achievements. And my third act." He paused, and Rachel could swear he looked nervous. "My third was to propose something that has never been done in our 10,000-year history." Rachel's stomach dropped like she'd stepped off a cliff. "What?" "The right of imperial adoption. It would make you my sister in Skyborn culture, equal in authority and rank. Co-ruler of the Dominion. Empress of half the known galaxy." The coffee cup slipped from Rachel's fingers. She didn't even see Aurelian move. One moment the cup was falling, the next it was in his clawed hand, not a drop spilled. He set it gently on the table. "You're insane," Rachel whispered. Her voice sounded far away, like someone else was speaking. "I'm an engineer. I design irrigation systems. I figure out why crops die and how to fix water flow. I'm nobody. I'm completely, totally nobody. You are the person who saved my life when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose." Aurelian's voice remained gentle but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "You were a child in a deadly flood, with your family screaming for you to save yourself. You chose to save me instead. That is precisely the quality our civilization has forgotten in our millennia of isolation. Compassion without calculation. Heroism without expectation of reward or recognition." "I can't." "I am not demanding," Aurelian interrupted, raising one claw to stop her. "This is crucial for you to understand. A life debt given under duress is meaningless in our culture. Worthless. You must choose freely or the debt remains mine alone. But know this, Rachel Bennett. The galaxy watches. Humanity has potential, but you are young and reckless in the eyes of elder races. They see you as children playing with guns. An alliance with the Dominion, sealed by your acceptance of this honor, would change everything. It would give your species legitimacy. Protection. A voice in galactic affairs." Rachel stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She paced to the window, needing to move, needing to think. Outside, she could see her neighbors gathering in small groups, pointing at the shuttle, at the sky. Her parents were out there somewhere. Danny and little Lily. Dr. Patterson. People she'd known her whole life. Normal people living normal lives. "What happens if I say no?" Rachel asked without turning around. "Nothing." The certainty in Aurelian's voice surprised her. She turned to look at him. "The debt remains mine alone. The fleet leaves. Your life continues exactly as it was. I will not coerce you. I will not threaten or manipulate. The choice must be yours. And if I say yes? Aurelian rose from his chair, moving to stand beside her at the window. Up close he was enormous. His shoulder was level with the top of her head. But he moved carefully, keeping space between them, not crowding her. Everything changes. For you. For humanity. For the Dominion. I will not lie to you. The burden would be immense. There would be threats, political games, species who hate humans and would see you dead. But you would not face it alone. I would stand with you. The entire might of the Dominion would stand with you. Rachel stared out at the stars, barely visible through the shimmer of thousands of ships. Somewhere out there was a throne she'd never imagined, a responsibility that terrified her, a future she couldn't even picture. But also, somewhere out there, was a chance to make a difference on a scale she'd never dreamed possible. To help not just her colony but maybe her entire species. I need time, Rachel said finally. Her voice was steady, steadier than she felt. I need to think. To talk to my family. Aurelian bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect. Take what you need. I have waited 15 years. I can wait longer. 3 days. That's all the time Rachel had before the pressure became unbearable. 72 hours that felt like 72 years. Earth's government sent diplomats in expensive suits who smiled with too many teeth and spoke in careful words that meant nothing. The Colonial Alliance dispatched negotiators who tried to look friendly while making thinly veiled threats about what could happen if Rachel made the wrong choice. Other alien civilizations, species Rachel had only seen in documentaries and educational videos, suddenly found humanity very interesting. Ships from a dozen different worlds parked themselves near the skyborne fleet. Everyone wanted to discuss the situation, which was a polite way of saying they wanted to manipulate her decision for their own benefit. Representatives showed up at her door at all hours. They sent messages. They tried to bribe her, threaten her, appeal to her sense of duty or patriotism or fear. A counselor from Earth actually had the audacity to tell her that refusing would be an act of treason against humanity. Rachel had hung up on him. But the worst pressure, the kind that actually kept her up at night, came from within. From the people she loved. Rachel sat in her childhood home, surrounded by walls covered in old photos and her mother's collection of painted pottery. The house smelled like it always had, like coffee and the lavender soap her mom insisted on using. Normal things. Safe things. Her mother Beth was making tea in the kitchen, the kettle whistling on the stove. Her father Michael paced the living room like a caged animal, wearing a path in the carpet. Danny leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, looking like he hadn't slept in the 3 days since the fleet arrived. Lily, Danny's 6-year-old daughter, was blissfully unaware of galactic politics. She played with toy starships on the floor, making explosion sounds as she crashed them into each other. Rachel envied her innocence more than she could express. The Prime Minister called me, Michael said quietly, still pacing. He wouldn't look at Rachel. Do you know what he said? That your decision could determine humanity's place in the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. 1,000 years, Rachel. No pressure though, Rachel muttered, staring at her hands. They wouldn't stop shaking. Beth came in from the kitchen carrying a tray with teacups that rattled slightly. She set it down with more force than necessary, the cups clinking together. Sweetheart, you don't owe anyone anything. Not Earth. Not the Dominion. Not any of these vultures circling outside. You saved a life because that's who you are. That's how we raised you. That doesn't mean you have to become whatever this is. Empress, Danny supplied from the doorway. The word is Empress. Let's not dance around it. I didn't ask for this, Rachel said, and her voice cracked on the last word. She felt tears building behind her eyes and tried to force them back. I was just trying to help. I saw something hurt and I helped it. That's all. How does that turn into this? Her father finally stopped pacing and sat beside her on the couch. It was the same couch she'd grown up on, worn in all the familiar places. He put his arm around her shoulders like he'd done when she was small. And that's exactly why they chose you. Anyone who wanted this kind of power, who actively sought it out, would be exactly the wrong person to have it. Power should go to people who don't want it, who understand the weight of it. Rachel leaned into her father's shoulder, feeling like a child again. What if I mess it up? What if I make decisions that get people killed? What if I'm not smart enough or strong enough or... Stop, Beth interrupted, sitting on Rachel's other side. You've been making life or death decisions about crop systems and water management for years. You've saved this colony from 3 droughts and 2 pest infestations. You're one of the smartest people I know. That's different. That's plants. This is empires and aliens and politics I don't understand. Danny pushed off from the doorframe and sat on the floor across from her. Remember when you were 16 and you stayed up for 48 hours straight to fix the water purification system? Everyone said it couldn't be done, that we'd have to wait for parts from Earth. You figured it out anyway. You saved the entire colony from dying of thirst. That was engineering. I'm good at engineering. You're good at solving problems, Danny corrected. You're good at seeing what needs to be done and doing it, even when it's hard. Even when it's scary. Lily abandoned her toys and climbed into Rachel's lap, her small hands sticky with something Rachel didn't want to identify. Are you gonna live on a spaceship, Aunt Rachel? She asked, her eyes wide and excited. Rachel's heart twisted. I don't know, sweetheart. Will you still visit? Lily's voice was small now, worried. Daddy says you might go far away. That question, so simple and innocent, cut through everything else. Rachel held her niece close and felt something settle in her chest. Not certainty exactly, but clarity. This wasn't about politics or power or humanity's place in the galaxy. It was about this. About the people she loved and the kind of person she wanted to be. Always, Rachel whispered into Lily's hair. No matter what happens, I'll always come back. That evening, Rachel asked to speak with Aurelian alone. They met on the hill overlooking Riverside Colony, the same hill where she used to play as a child. Away from diplomats and cameras and the crushing weight of everyone's expectations. Tell me the truth, Rachel said, watching the sun set over her hometown. Why me? Really? There are billions of humans. Surely someone more qualified, someone who actually knows about leadership and politics, and qualification is not character. Aurelian's wings spread slightly in the evening light, casting long shadows. In my culture, we have a saying that translates roughly to, the true measure of nobility is found in moments when no one is watching. You were 10 years old. The storm was deadly. Everyone else fled. You heard suffering and ran toward it, not away. Anyone would have done the same. No. His voice was sharp, more intense than she'd heard before. They wouldn't. My people studied the security footage from that day. 63 humans passed that drainage tunnel. 63 heard my cries. 63 chose their own safety over investigating. Only you stopped. Only you risked everything for a creature you didn't recognize or understand. Rachel absorbed this, watching the lights of her colony begin to glow in the growing darkness. What would I actually do? As Empress, I mean. What does that even look like day to day? You would govern alongside me. The Dominion spans 300 systems and contains 47 species. We have grown rigid over millennia. Isolated. Set in our ways. I became Crown Prince believing change was needed. You would be that change. A bridge between your people and mine. A voice for compassion in a civilization that has forgotten how to feel. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. I'm scared. Good. Aurelian's rumbling laugh surprised her. Anyone who wants power and feels no fear is dangerous. Your fear means you understand the responsibility. It means you'll take it seriously. Rachel turned to face him fully, squaring her shoulders. If I do this, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do, I have conditions. Name them. Riverside Colony becomes neutral ground. A place where humans and Skyborn can meet, learn from each other, build trust. My family stays here, safe, away from whatever political nightmare this becomes unless they choose otherwise. And I want Dr. Patterson on my advisory council. The vet who saved your life alongside me deserves recognition too. Aurelian's eyes blazed with something that looked like approval, maybe even pride. You think like an empress already? I think like someone who knows she can't do this alone. Rachel took a shaky breath. I'll accept your offer. But not because of pressure or politics or what's good for humanity. I'm accepting because that scared, hurt creature I pulled from the flood grew up to be someone who'd fly across the galaxy to honor a debt. That kind of integrity is rare. Maybe with that kind of partner, I can actually make a difference. Maybe together we can build something worth believing in. The Crown Prince of the Skyborn Dominion bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect in his culture. Then let us begin. The ceremony took place in the heart of the Dominion, a space station so vast it had its own weather patterns. Rachel had watched clouds form inside the main hall, actual clouds that drifted between the pillars and dissolved into mist. The station was older than human civilization, built when Earth's ancestors still lived in caves and hunted with stone tools. The walls were made of something that looked like crystal but felt warm to the touch, and they hummed with a frequency Rachel felt in her bones more than heard. She stood in halls that had witnessed 10,000 years of history, surrounded by representatives from thousands of worlds. The crowd stretched so far back Rachel couldn't see the end. Beings of every shape and size filled the space. Some had scales like Aurelian. Others had fur or feathers or skin that shifted colors. Some breathed oxygen, others wore breathing apparatus. A few didn't seem to breathe at all. All of them watched her with expressions she couldn't read, judging this human who dared to stand where no human had stood before. Rachel wore armor forged specifically for her over the past 3 days. It was silver blue like Aurelian scales, but the craftsman had etched Earth's oceans across the chest plate and Riverside's mountains along the shoulders. Human and skyborn merged into something new, something that had never existed before. The armor was lighter than it looked, moving with her like a second skin. She'd been told it was made of living metal, the same material as the crown she was about to receive. It would grow with her, adapt to her, become part of her. Her parents sat in places of honor in the front row, looking completely out of place and trying not to show it. Beth wore her nicest dress, the one she saved for weddings. Michael had trimmed his beard and looked uncomfortable in formal clothes. Danny sat beside them with Lily on his lap. The little girl's eyes were huge, taking in everything with 6-year-old wonder. She waved at Rachel and Rachel had to fight the urge to wave back. Dr. Patterson stood with the Dominion's High Council, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else. The elderly veterinarian had muttered, "I'm too old for this," 17 times during the journey from Riverside. She'd said it when boarding the ship, when experiencing faster-than-light travel for the first time, when seeing the heart of the Dominion, and approximately 14 other times. But she'd come anyway because Rachel had asked. The woman who'd bandaged a prince's wings with shaking hands would now advise an empire. The ceremony was being broadcast across the galaxy. Billions watched on their equivalent of screens or through neural interfaces or by methods Rachel couldn't begin to understand. Every major news network carried it. People on Earth had stopped working to watch. Entire colonies gathered in town squares. Even species that barely acknowledged human existence were paying attention now. Aurelian stood before her in full regalia. His armor made him look even larger, more imposing, covered in symbols of rank and authority that glowed faintly. His wings spread wide, so wide they cast shadows over the assembled crowd. Each feather caught the light differently, creating a display that was almost hypnotic. When he spoke, his voice carried through translation fields that filled the massive hall, ensuring every species present could understand in their own language. 15 years ago I was dying, Aurelian began, his voice resonating through the chamber. Lost on an unknown world, trapped beneath debris, injured and alone. A child of a species we'd never contacted found me. She risked her life to save mine, expecting nothing in return. No reward. No recognition. She helped because she saw suffering and could not turn away. He paused, letting the words sink in. Today, Rachel Bennett becomes Empress not through conquest or birthright, but through the oldest law of our people, the recognition of true nobility. Not nobility of blood, but nobility of character. Aurelian lifted the circlet from a cushion held by one of his advisors. It wasn't a crown of jewels or precious metals like human royalty wore. It was living metal, silver and gold twisted together in patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly. The metal pulsed with faint light, almost like a heartbeat. He placed it on Rachel's head and she felt it warm against her skin. The metal moved, adjusting itself, finding its place. It would grow with her, bond to her, mark her as skyborn despite her humanity. She felt the weight of it, not physical weight but the weight of everything it represented. Rachel was supposed to speak prepared remarks. Some speechwriter from Earth had sent her pages of carefully crafted words about unity and cooperation and humanity's bright future. She'd read them once and forgotten them immediately. Instead, she looked at the thousands of faces before her, human, skyborn, and species she couldn't even name, and spoke from her heart. "I'm not special," Rachel began, and heard her words translated and carried across the vast hall. She knew they were being broadcast to billions but she tried not to think about that. "I'm an ordinary person who made an ordinary choice. I saw someone hurting and I helped. That's all it was. That's all it should have been. But maybe that's the point." She looked at Aurelian then back at the assembly. Her voice grew stronger. "Every civilization here has myths of heroes. Special people with special powers who save the world. Chosen ones. Destined leaders. People who were always meant for greatness. But that's not how the real world works. The galaxy isn't shaped by a few heroes. It's shaped by millions of ordinary people making small choices every single day. To help or ignore. To build or destroy. To show compassion or turn away." Rachel touched the circlet on her head, feeling the living metal pulse against her fingers. "I don't know if I'll be a good empress. I'm going to make mistakes. Probably a lot of them. I'm going to mess up and say the wrong thing and make decisions I'll regret. But I promise you this, I'll try to remember what it feels like to be ordinary, to be scared, to feel powerless, and I'll use whatever power you've given me to make sure those ordinary voices are heard. Because those voices matter. Every single one of them matters. The silence that followed felt eternal. Rachel's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Had she said too much? Not enough. Said the wrong thing entirely? Then Aurelian began that deep, rumbling purr she remembered from when he was small. Other Skyborn picked it up, the sound building and spreading through the hall like a wave. Species Rachel didn't know joined in with their own sounds of approval. Clicks and whistles and harmonics that made her skin tingle. Even the humans in attendance started clapping, the sound strange and small compared to the alien responses but heartfelt. Rachel looked out at the crowd and realized something. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. The scared girl who'd pulled a creature from a flood had become an empress. But she was still that same girl, surrounded by people who believed in her. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough.